Setting it up. One second here. All right. Well, it's 3:40 in the afternoon here in Canada, but it is, of course, not that in Australia. I'm here with my friend Rosa Bunn, and we haven't actually talked in a while in around this.
Been a while, David.
Yeah, we've messaged off and on, but so this is pretty exciting. I love the. I always love the opportunity to talk to people who are, share the same bandwidth, share the same kind of passion in around this conversation of health and wellness. And again, I think the reason why we connected is that we share a very holistic point of view. We share a very holistic viewpoint on how to best manage our personal health. And I connected with you because I earlier on in the year, just before the world went kind of tilted sideways, I came across a continuing education credits course, and the course was on the vagus nerve.
Yeah.
And the importance of the vagus nerve and psychology and health. So of course I hopped in, took this mini course. I thought it was pretty fascinating. But then it just the HPA axis and the vagus nerve, and again we'll explain what this means in a little bit more depth. But very fascinating, like very, very fascinating at the power. And I think that with the author of the study, I can't remember the doctor's name, but it was the polyvagal theory is what he was speaking to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, what is your awareness of that? What is your given what you do now? Actually, could you give a little bit about your background first of all?
Sure. So I run a boutique healthcare clinic and multi-modality approach. So definitely this concept of a holistic view. So how do we actually create wellness and well-being? So we need body movements and physical form of body movement. That's always been, the underline has been like a gym environment, but then Pilates and yoga sort of came into my journey. And then from there, there's always this kind of essence of breath and form, breath and movement. And from there, the training's also the naturopathic training, so the plant pharmacy and plant pharmacological medicine. And this positiveness of, which has always been part of my personality, is like seeing things in that positive spirit or a positive light of adding light to a situation or a solution based focus to problems that we all face as human beings. So what's the positive or a solution based outcome? And so then when you ask me about the vagus nerve, I find that really wow, because particularly Pilates, the discipline of Pilates is about the core. And then when we look at the central nervous system, we know that there's 3 areas of the central nervous system, the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, and the intrinsic system, which is the gut. And as you know, I've written the book on gut health. And so then that, in that whole approach of wellness, just fascinates me. And when you asked me, Rosa, let's have a discussion on the vagus nerve, I was really elated, quite excited that really the essence of that is the training of the vagus nerve, essentially. And how do we tap into the intrinsic system of that, of feeding the gut response, and then the link and the gorgeous amount of research coming up from gut to mind and mental well-being and the emotional well-being and all the nerves that are coming in from the gut. So how do we connect those 3 areas?
Yeah, it's it's there's so many layers that we peel off with this. For people that are listening, the vagus nerve, it's the longest cranial nerve. And what's so interesting is that we think about the nervous system, we think about nerves that supply muscle tone, right? For muscle contraction, nervous impulse, of course, through our brain, but we don't think of our nerve as related to, we don't think of our nerves when it relates to gut health. Like it's not,
True.
not a consideration. We don't think of our nerves when it relates to, our nervous response to our environment, and then that response and how it affects our spleen or our pancreas, or like we're so intertwined that there's nothing happens that doesn't happen everywhere. And I think
Yes.
modern medicine has done this bit of a disservice. I mean, I understand allopathic medicine for what it does. I understand that there's very specific things that we have to address, but health isn't about singularity. It's about the multiplicity. It's about all these things working together. And that's why it's actually kind of challenging when you kind of strip it away, because, as soon as you zoom in, you miss the picture. You miss everything else that's going on, which plays a key role in what you're trying to look at right here in this little tiny box.
Yes.
But why the vagus nerve really I found very fascinating, and there's a few things that this doctor had spoke about, and as it relates to physical fitness and choices that people make when it comes to exercise. So, and again, it was kind of offhanded, but I want to know if you've heard of this. So they talked about, of course, our vagus nerve, of course, is also is the administrator of fight, flight, or numb, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's the dorsal vagus nerve is a part of the numbing process, right?
Yeah.
And that was the one they were most interested in, because and get a sidetrack here, but they went back and they were looking at the dorsal vagus nerve in relationship to women who were involved in rape cases, but they say they didn't fight back, and it was kind of thrown out. But it wasn't they didn't fight back, is that their dorsal vagus nerve kicked in and they were immobilized and they couldn't fight back. So, it was very interesting to listen to this research that this guy poured through it. But so he said something really fascinating. He goes, for those individuals that like to, let's say, like to go CrossFit, or like to do martial arts, or like to do triathlon, or not triathlons, but let's say strength training, really, really kind of aggressive, aggressive type of activity. He said those people, if you look at their vagus, their primary stimulus would be more the fight aspect of the fight, flight, or numb. And so people that love endurance activities, that like to run, maybe triathletes and cyclists and marathoners, if stress was a driver, it'd be more of the flight part of the stress circuit. And that's why it feels so good, why it becomes so addictive. And then even perhaps meditation, yoga, and things of that nature, if it's an exercise, then the numbing part could be the sedative part of the numbing aspect of the vagus nervous system. And they didn't really expand on it, but I'm going, that's really kind of interesting, because I've asked stressed out people when they said, I'm having trouble losing weight, I don't feel very good, my sleep is poor. And I pose this question, and which kind of makes me think that there's a lot of validity to what this doctor had said. I ask people routinely and said, listen, you're training too hard, your sleep is terrible, your diet just can't support everything. So I want to scale everything down, at least for about 3 or 4 weeks, and work on sleep, and then work on recovery. And I asked this individual, and this was actually somebody in Australia that I zoomed through to do a 3-way call with. And I said, what if I could guarantee you that, let's say, I don't want you to train for 6 weeks now, and I was going to work on diet, work on sleep, work on meditation. But what if I could guarantee you that you wouldn't gain any fat, you really wouldn't lose any strength, nothing would change except that you couldn't do that. And you could feel the person's anxiety level come up.
Yeah.
And the very first thing they said is, what about my mental health? And I go, that's really interesting. And what I found is that it's, exercise feels good because it's responding to the impulse of the body. And I'll let you speak to this in a second. So we're being driven by this impulse that's saying you got to do something. And ideally, exercise would be a good form of stress release, but exercise is also a form of stress. And if we're never recovering and we're always being prompted to go and move and move and move, the cost of that is just extraordinarily high, especially over time. Now, what are your thoughts on that? Have you heard those ideas surrounding that?
I think it's really on point to to where I'm sitting with this, David, the strenuous exercise, it actually decreases the actual vagal activity, and that's the point. That's the clear message there. And when we are under so much stress in terms of daily function, and we're working full time, and we've got families full time, and the impact of that alone, and then we're putting in the marathon and training the marathon or training the triathlon kind of strenuous elite level, like you were sharing, with time or over a decade period of doing that, and then you come into this kind of, you crash into a heap, and then you start to reassess what is actual the exercise component, and then you start to realize that it is a stress on the physiology of our bodies, of mind and body, and it's not sustainable. It's only, I think it's only there for a season or for a short-lived period of time. And then there's if we're looking at regeneration of cells, I kind of see it as a degeneration of cells. We're actually creating more harm than good. And because we're not really understanding the central nervous system as a whole component. So I think when we start to understand the central nervous system, that it activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight and flight response, as you were sharing. And that's always on as a primal body. Flight and fight is always on. So we're always in our primal brain, that we're thinking that there's always a predator, we're not actually safe. So that's always underlining, and so that's an undertone already of stress. And then we're building more of that stress in our sympathetic nervous system, the SNS. Yeah, and so then when I found modalities of Pilates and yoga, I didn't realize at the time, it's only like after 10, 12 years that I started to realize, hey, there's more to it. There's more science to this than I actually really realized, which is a really beautiful gift, really, in essence, that I actually started to understand that I did feel calmer within. So I loved how you opened this up in the chaos around us, and 2020 is definitely the climate of this chaotic kind of climate, and everything that we knew is kind of unknown. So the fight and flight is actually a lot higher than I believe that we give credit for in this current climate. And so how do we stay anchored within ourselves in that system of allowing the vagal activity to increase? And Pilates and yoga gives us an avenue for this, which fundamentally is about breath, the prana. Yogis refer it to as the pranayama, or it's a Sanskrit word really, meaning the control of breath or the system of breath. Yeah.
So, but now, when you're speaking about breath work, there's quite a different physiological reaction when you breathe through your mouth as opposed to breathing through your nose.
Yes.
I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast. There was a scientific editor or reporter, and he went through a 1-year program of nasal breathing, and I think he had a deviated septum in the beginning, but chose not for surgery. Right. And he said, like the passage, like the nasal septum, the space up here is the size of a baseball. He said, actually really quite large. And you're really supposed to nasal breathe. But it's not just about filtration and warming it. There's a physiological response. There's a nervous system response to breathing through your nose, so this is more settling, and breathing through your mouth is potentially more excitatory. It'll get you a little more anxious. Because you think about running away from something, you're breathing heavily through your mouth, which of course, again, there's a whole system of cues attached to that. And breathing through your nose, well, there's a different set of cues attached to that. Can you explain the difference between the two?
I really like that. When I was practicing, really the first years of studying yoga, really, probably 15 years ago now for me, or maybe 18 years ago, something like that. We won't go too far. What really is there? I like how you referred to the filtered breath. You know, breathing in through the nose and breathing out through the nose is calming. There's a soothing, calming effect there. On our physiology, we're tapping into part of our central nervous system, which is the ENS system, which we spoke just really. We touched on very briefly on how do we access that third part of the central nervous system, the ENS, the intrinsic system of our central nervous system. So we want to kind of pacify or calm, and I like the word calm because in calmness then we see things in their right view. So we're not in the buzz of stress. And we're making harsh or rash decisions, or we're allowing the body to feel calm in our choices or calm in our decision making and what actually is fundamentally right for us. And in applying that calmness to breath, I think even on my own personal journey, is that when I'm calm, then my breath is soft and gentle, and I'm easily to receive it, and I'm easily to give it.
Right.
So I'm breathing in, inhale, pause, exhale, pause. The other thing I love, sorry, David.
No, please go ahead.
The other thing that I love about knowing more about the vagus nerve is that when we exhale the breath, the exhalation part acts as a braking system to the actual heart muscle. It actually breaks. It creates like a gentle pressure, a gentle braking action to the heart muscle. And that, in effect, on the physiology level, is allowing the heart to calm and the mind to calm. So through the breath, we inhale, and the quality of the exhale, the calmness of the exhale, and the strength of the exhale with the muscle tone through the diaphragm, the small braking action on the heart, allows that physiology to start changing.
Right. It's there was a report I read a couple of years back, and they said if you went into a cardiac ward of a hospital, almost everybody that is in there with a heart attack, they're all shallow breathers. They're all top chest breathers. And it just and the whole thing of breathing, and I've heard it forever, right? For a couple of decades, but it's only been the last 5 years that's really made sense. Where because I also wrapped up in complexity that if it wasn't, didn't require a slide roller to figure it out, there's not much point to it. But I love the simplicity of it because it's, throughout the day, and, especially if I'm doing bookkeeping, something that stresses me out.
Yeah, totally.
Especially in 2020, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But just to be able to know that, in just a matter of seconds, I can down throttle my nervous system without really much effort, and it's, it was so interesting when I was watching all the violence occur in the US this past year. And we talk about stress, and, we become maladapted to it because, people just think it's normal. Like, I'm good. And then they get hear a bad thing on the news, they throw the TV at the window, going, oh yeah, you're not stressed at all. And we just saw this pressure cooker where people were just generally under, we're maladapted to stress coming into 2020. It wasn't 2020 that caused it. It was 2020 that exposed it, right? It just took it over threshold. So, and that was really plain to see because people were going, well, what's all the chaos about? And I said, well, I know there's things that people are saying, and yes, there's probably some validity in what they're, lighting buildings on fire for, perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think for most of us, we're unconscious. We're unconscious to why we acted out of character, per se, because of an external stimulus. And even though, yes, things are really quite haywire and uncertain for everybody on the planet, the response is excessive to the event. And you see, relatively normal, good people that would never react that way, all of a sudden find themselves in acting very out of character for themselves because of that systemic, long-term stressor that's just been bubbling away forever, and then it just took something to peak it up. but so it's really important. And that's really what I wanted to talk to you about this, because it's one of the things I was afraid of this year as I was watching things unfold. One, of course, mental health. I was really concerned about mental health for so many people, and even myself. Right? I mean, just I'm in my head a lot, and I bear the burden of a lot of responsibility for a lot of things that I'm doing. And I was tracking myself, and I could feel myself probably the latter part of March, just feeling the weight of everything, the weight of uncertainty, because it's so unknown.
Mm.
And I could feel myself how exhausted I was getting just from having to try to filter my way through all this uncertainty and newness, right? And because there was no constant narrative, there was no narrative to follow. But another thing that I was really curious about, and this actually, because I did this little short upgrading course on polyvagal theory,
Yeah.
and then the conversation around autoimmunity came up, and autoimmunity and the vagus nerve.
Yeah,
And,
right.
it was really quite. There's a Canadian doctor called Dr. Gabor Mate, and really quite a really interesting guy to listen to. And he said something really interesting. He said, if you look at almost every autoimmune disorder, what are the treatment protocol for most autoimmune disorders? Cortisol or cortisone and epinephrine. He said, so for most autoimmune disorders, the medication we give them are stress hormones. It does not tell us something about the nature of the disease process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I went out and I spoke to a couple of individuals that have autoimmune issues. And I said, I had asked them, I said, when was your diagnosis? And they said, within 3 to 5 years, right? I said, did anything significantly change in that time? And this one individual said, yeah, I had 5 years ago, I made a massive lifestyle change. And she said that without missing a beat. I made a massive lifestyle change. And then shortly thereafter, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder. And another lady, the same thing. It said, when was your diagnosis? Well, I think I was about 16 years old. Anything dramatic happened around that time period? Yeah, I was thrown out of my house at the age of 16. So there was chronic stressors, and then an acute stressor that actually pushed the genome, pushed that genetic possibility for that disease or that disorder to show up. And so I was thinking about all the autoimmune issues, and I think, well, if autoimmunity is directly connected to, maybe not 100% to, but directly connected to or influenced by the vagus nerve, and we have an increase in stressors straight across the map, straight across the board for the entire world, what would that look like? And would we see an increase in autoimmune issues and even more new types of disorders? So current ones would be would be elevated, would be more inflammation, more issues, more trouble, like more challenges with their pre-existing conditions. And people who are on the cusp are now may be experiencing new autoimmune issues that never existed before prior to 2020.
Yeah, sure. I really like how you've brought that to light, really, David. You know my background in endometriosis, and there's current research now suggesting, as a theory that, is it possible, the inquiry, the question is it an autoimmune related condition? And being an endometriosis sister, I really take that on board, because in my own routine, in my own journey of endo and walking the path, and now sharing my journey and the key distinctions that are very helpful for me, that I think someone that wouldn't know that and upon meeting me would not know that about me, because the vitality is there and the function is there, but there's lots of work that's been in the background that I feel that it's kind of pushing me and propelling me to share what those key distinctions are, because they are big game changers. And like you were sharing before, they're not difficult, but it's the consistency of the application. It's
Right.
the consistency of the application of stillness or calmness and tapping into the vagus nerve. I think when we are stressed, and definitely in 2020, you have external stresses as well as your internal stresses. And so then both as say are at 100%, then
Right.
wow, that's like almost like fuel for your condition, fuel for your
Right.
disease to actually accelerate, accelerating its replication on a cellular level. And how do we reduce inflammation when we're living in an inflammatory environment? And like you were sharing that gene expression, we're kind of tapping into epigenetics, which is, a strong love for me, is our environment is conducive to our well-being. And so that taps into the central nervous system, the ENS, which is the
Right.
gut response. So if we're feeling calm, then rest and digest is there for regeneration and cellular repair. And we're processing our food. There's a bioavailability of nutrients coming into the body, which is the DNA through RNA when we go to sleep, the RNA replication for the next day. So then we're having optimum chance to be at our optimum level of performance.
Right.
But if we're not giving ourselves that opportunity, then definitely it's a recipe of degeneration. We're kind of accelerating the aging process, and I see aging as an umbrella of accelerating the condition, accelerating the disease,
Right.
promoting that rather than promoting something else that's totally available to us. It's just a different avenue.
Yeah, well, yeah, I think it's kind of counterintuitive, because if your stress circuit is telling you to flee or fight or numb, and what we're saying is that you just need to breathe and relax and chill out and get a good night's sleep and be gentle. And you're going, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's not what my nervous system is telling me to do right now, right?
Sure.
Right. So it's being able to for people to actually to really to understand what your body's saying. And I think that's the lack of connection to who we are, the lack of understanding of what our body really wants. And again, as I said earlier on, we've been so stressed out for so long. It's just that maladaptation, and we don't even know what that feels like. That sense of calm. It's just, calm might be just, people say, well, when are you calm? When I'm unconscious. Right.
Yeah, I love that. I love that inquiry. I think the first thing that came in, you've just really opened up this visual. I've got gorgeous two nephews and a gorgeous niece, and watching them grow up, from day one, it's like our little brothers and children, and we know when they're so tired and they're overtired and they really need to sleep, and they're like, no, I don't want to go to bed. No, I don't want to go to bed, and I want to still keep playing. Keep playing. And you can see their eyes starting to roll back, and they're like really forcing their little bodies to actually keep going. And then all of a sudden they just fall in a heap. And I'm like, wow, that's like us, adults walking around, and it's like, listen to your body. It's actually time to go to sleep. Yeah, time to rest. And I think I like the word of we've normalized something that's not normal.
Right.
Yeah, it's And I was listening to a podcast actually this morning on rest. So we have 7 days, and we should really be allocating 1 day of rest. Right. And so then COVID comes along, and Mother Earth is forcing us to rest. Right. And it's been how long that we haven't been listening that we actually are needing rest.
Well, I've heard feedback from different people, not from everyone, but a lot of people that have said, yes, it's been stressful financially and the uncertainty for sure, but the amount of people that said I love being out with my kids in nature. I love hiking, and they found the opportunity to do things they would normally do. They watched everything Netflix had to offer, and that was done by the end of March, right? So there's nothing to watch on Netflix anymore. And but being in nature, a lot of people actually really found that to be it was an important pause for them.
Mm.
And yeah, I've seen a fair amount of that. But as you said, it's, there's nothing about a world that's natural. And I when you're talking about your nieces and nephews running around and kind of losing their mind, not wanting to sleep, but I think about artificial light, and of course they're being stimulated. Uh, the um, suprachiasmatic nucleus. I can't remember. I actually remember that word.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I know, right? But the receptor of the brain that looks at melatonin secretion, that's tracking the amount of light in our environment. When my son and I were in Nicaragua, in this village called Iquilio, there was just one little thin wire of electricity running through the village, and which of course supported the place we were in. But a lot of the surrounding village huts, there was no power. And 6:30 at night, of course, in a lot of these Mediterranean countries, most of things like Australia, it gets dark pretty early, right, for the most
Yeah,
part. So
yeah.
6:30 at night, there's no power. So what do people do? They went to bed. They get up
Amazing.
early. So you think about that, we're binaural creatures. We're creatures of light. And so when we have this natural light, especially in this environment, we get to see it firsthand. Everything went quiet,
Mm.
and you couldn't go running around because you'd kill yourself for one. You're running around in the dark in the jungle. That's not smart. But two, that natural sedative nature, the sedative effect of dusk to dark, and people were living in sync with that environment. It was very interesting to observe.
Yeah.
And here in our 24/7, fluorescent light environment, like, and it's why I like these conversations, because everything in our world, in our natural world, is so unnatural. So
Yeah.
if we can't rely on manual labor or working as a farmer or working in the forest or to give us physical exercise. So we actually have to do it consciously. Um, we actually have to regulate our light exposure through wearing glasses at night when we're watching television or working on a computer, to avoid the effects of blue light turning the brain back on. We have to consciously not eat past a certain time because, well, the body really would enjoy. I never knew this before. I'm kind of getting all over the map here, but I didn't even realize till years ago that our pancreas actually has a receptor site for melatonin. And so that when the light goes down, melatonin gets secreted in a couple of different ways, but it actually down regulates our insulin secretion at night because we're not supposed to be eating at night.
Amazing.
Right. So, but all these beautiful natural things our environment used to have, we don't have
Mm.
anymore. So as frustrated as I get sometimes trying to walk people through this, I do empathize that there's a lot of moving parts to to
Mm.
um, to developing your personal health. And I think that one of the most important ones, of course, which is the nature of this conversation, is that how do we first just slow everything down? How do we first just regulate our stress circuit, so we actually have the bandwidth to even think about doing the next thing, right?
Mm.
So breathing is the first thing. Well, let's just master breathing until we get good at that for the first little while. And once we learn how to breathe, then once we're breathing becomes fairly normal for us,
Mm.
then we can actually have the opportunity to do the next thing. But I think we try to
Mm.
make it too complicated, and we're trying to fix too many problems when really you just got to start with the first thing, and I think the most important thing, which is the regulation of our stress response, especially in this environment.
Mm. Definitely. I love the conversation around understanding the primal body. What is the primal body, the primal diet, the primal function, and how do we, if that is the blueprint, which it is, then how close are we going to be able to map and place ourselves onto that blueprint
Right.
and hold onto that blueprint? And what is it today that I can actually change in my framework, in my methodology of my conduct, in my routine, in my daily practice, in my daily function, in my daily role, in the way that I show up daily, to close match to that blueprint.
Right.
And the further away that I am from that blueprint, well, that's just a whole different framework, and I know what that's going to mean. It's going to mean more stress, it's going to be more disease state, it's going to mean more challenges in that way. But if I'm coming closer to that blueprint, then I've got a better chance.
Right. Well, and it's, you know, and again, I think just in relationship to what's going on this year and just the significant challenges, you know, the ability to understand, you know, what our stress response is, understand the vagus nerve and how important it is, and the simplicity of just, you know, we just need to do one thing. I know people want to do lots of things. They'd like, you know, because if the solution's that simple, it can't be all that effective. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of the mentality. There has to be, you know, some sort, again, needs a slide ruler to figure it out. It needs to be complicated. And that took me the longest time to just to allow that to be the answer, saying, just breathe, just breathe. In fact, I created a little mini course in April called Just Breathe.
Yeah,
wow. From the Wim Hof method, right, which was an extraordinary guy, from the Wim Hof method for mixed type of breathing, from different types of yogic breathing, breath work, and just really introduce it to people, because again, I wanted to find, I didn't want to give people more things to do. You know, I already have my fitness clients and my wellness clients with, you know, they're trying to juggle a bunch of health modalities, which are not always that simplistic, and kind of, you know, they kind of fall in and out of them. But I didn't want to give them anything more to do. But I said, just do this one thing, just breathe. And so, you know, I think, so here's a curiosity. And again, I'm jumping around here a little bit because we always have so many interesting things to talk about when we get together here. Now, when we look at the stress response and the vagus nerve is lit up, and you had mentioned the idea that if we can use our breath work to create some clarity. Now, I find it interesting that when we're stressed out, when we're in that stress circuit, I had this expression that stress goes to where stress resides. And so below threshold, if I have a bunch of unspoken stressors, a bunch of things that are festering inside my brain. So it could be 15 to 20 things that I've just kind of hung on to, that just kind of piled up, you know, some, you know, we call it, you know, your mental baggage. And then just a bunch of irritants over time that kind of build up. And then one more stressor just lights them all up. So my response to what's going on is exaggerated because it's being fueled by 14 or 15 different things. Right? And I saw this firsthand many years ago when I first became very painfully aware of it. I was giving my son a bath, and earlier on that day, I was having a very long and very frustrating discussion with an employee. And I just shaking my head. I just go, man, I just, you know, very, very frustrated. Then I go home and have dinner and I'm bathing my son, and he's splashing water like a child would. And then I got really agitated, like really agitated. And I actually could see the energy from the conversation with my employee earlier on in the day. I could see that energy just come at my poor kid in the bathtub. And it was the first time that I was ever aware of just how powerful that is, that lack of awareness of what's going on beneath the surface. And so when you talked about using breath work to reduce the threshold of stress so you can actually see more clearly, it's actually a perfect point, because, you know, again, when I think I spoke earlier on where, you know, people are feeling out of character and not feeling like themselves, and they're responding, but they're responding with a bunch of these kind of anxiety created triggers from their history, and they light up. So, you know, you could be reacting overtly to something in front of you, but what you're reacting to is actually powered by something that happened 10 years ago that was been festering away for a long time. And by continuously lowering that threshold of stress, you actually get to be in this really calm space. And you use the word calm quite a bit in our conversation. But being in a space of calm, you actually get to access your intelligence.
Absolutely. It gives you that. I refer it to that when I'm doing my mindfulness programs, is that it gives you that buffer. So the actual buffer, so that you apply your intelligence away from the actual stress, or you can actually go into the observer or witness state as the buffer, and that's your buffer zone. And then you can choose how you want to show up.
Right.
And you're like, okay, you know, I am actually really stressed about that. I can feel my heart racing. I can feel my sweat glands increasing, you know, all those signals from the actual primal body. I'm feeling a lot warmer, or that heat rush because I'm angry or I'm frustrated. You know, they can be signals if we kind of really are in that moment and being present in our bodies, instead of being overtaken by that actual emotion called anger or frustration. It's like calming that response down in the actual buffer zone. And the more we practice breath, the more we have of the buffer zone. So it's almost like in my running days, it's like running the first K was really hectic, and then running 10 Ks over a year or 6 months then becomes easy. I think the same application is here, but we're in a different system of that calm system. And I think that's the beauty here. It's allowing us to be who we really are, rather than be something that we're not. We're not anger, we're not frustration.
Yeah, well, again, it goes back to the phrasing that I had used, where when people saying, like, I don't feel like myself,
Yeah.
or that, or that's totally out of character for you, but totally characteristic of you when you're 20 years old and dealing with something back then. But yeah, that's something that's really important, and it's the idea when you first started running, you became better over time. Well, breath work, or what you call it, your spiritual practice. And this was really interesting. This was something that Jordan Peterson, a Canadian psychologist, had illuminated, and it really made sense. He said that prior to the 20th century, we actually had a lot of really deep-rooted cultural and spiritual practices that were a part of our daily practice. It was just what it was. We had rituals around death. We had rituals around our food. We had rituals around seasons and harvest. We had rituals around this. We had rituals around that. And yes, the world was negative, and because Mother Nature is trying to kill you at every turn, and so was the neighboring tribe. But besides all that, besides the volatility of existence, you had these practices, but they were a practice. And as the 20th century, a lot of that kind of got watered away and washed away to the the Enlightenment era, and the rational thinking came on board, and we got and there was there's a lot of things that and let's say old practices that don't need to come forward, but I think the key thing that was lost, the loss in the transition, was the daily practices of cultural and spiritual beliefs, whether it's transcendent or whether it's just to keep yourself alive. But we had a way to buffer it, and prayer and meditation and belief. My time again in Nicaragua, I talk about this quite a bit. I remember sitting in these old Catholic churches, and I'd sit there and I'd meditate because it seemed like a great place to do it. And I'd watch people kind of come in, and they go up to the various altars, and I'd see somebody up there, and they'd be sobbing for about 15 minutes, and then they get themselves together and they go away. And I watched this one gentleman. He was there for about 45 minutes, and I was watching him. I was envious. And why I was envious, I thought, like, how lucky is he? Because he's actually processing his troubles in real time. Like, he's not waiting until he has a heart attack and then saying, well, for the last 20 years, this is what I've been dealing with. He's got a problem, and he's in a place of belief, and that, a belief and a sense of security. He's working through his thing. He's obviously struggling with something. He's working through this problem, working through the emotions, which we know is healthy. Working the whole process, processing and talking about it, thinking about it, putting it out there to the universe or to God, whatever we want to believe is listening to us. Then he goes home to a group of people that actually believe what he believes.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much power in that, and I think that's to me, regardless of what you believe, I think that's the part that's missing. It's not just,
Mm,
we're so fragmented in our world now of what we believe. And that's why all these things that we talk about seem so complicated, but it's not complicated to me because I have a very specific belief structure around health, wellness, mindset. So it's like, even though I have lots of complexity, it's very simple because my daily practice keeps
mm,
me in, it keeps me in line. And for
yeah.
those just that don't have a practice, or let's say a philosophical practice or a physical practice, they don't have that yet, and they're just kind of being buffeted around. It can seem
Mm,
very, very daunting.
mm. I really hear. I really love this. I refer to this concept of framework. What's the framework? What's our methodology? What's the framework? So understanding what is the framework that I live in,
Right.
and within that framework, who's the tribe? Who is my tribe? And the tribe of people that we naturally connect into, and we're like, yeah, when we first meet, someone is like, yes, I know you. On an intrinsic level, there's a connection there. And if you're really listening and tapping into that, it's really easy to see who your tribe is in the same methodology, in the same framework that you want to show up in our lives. And I like how you shared that when you know your tribe, then it's easier, makes it so much easier to practice your routine, to practice your rituals, to practice your daily function. And I do refer to this as the daily practice. And my clients, friends, loved ones, what is the daily practice? How are you showing up, really? And what value, really? What value are we providing within ourselves and to each other? And what's my responsibility here? And I think 2020 is a really beautiful kind of, time, really, into really having that inquiry is, what am I going to do? How am I going to show up? I'm here to create some value, actually. Something has to shift here.
Well, and you said something really important. It's just, it's what's our responsibility.
What's our responsibility?
Yeah. Because it's, when I talk about just even basic health, if I'm not doing well because my chosen lifestyle behavior has made me vulnerable to death and disease, and there's people that rely on me, whether it's children or a partner, or people I work with, or friends that would like to see me around a little bit longer. We don't, in North America especially, we talk a lot about people's rights, but we rarely talk about people's responsibilities. And when you bear the burden of responsibility, it actually makes life better, because all of a sudden the degree of let's say you call it self-esteem, for lack of a better word, but you feel like you're contributing, like like we're here to solve a problem. It's it's an old Christian adage about pick up your cross and walk, like bear the burden of responsibility.
Yeah.
And it's actually exciting. It gives, my life has 10 times more meaning because I'm out here trying to solve a bunch of problems. And then at the day of my passing, I can look back, oh man, it's just, okay, I solved a few problems, and I wasn't really a part of the problem. Right. And and it really creates much more meaning when you know that there's more at stake than just your happiness. Right.
Yeah.
It's just, it's not just about me, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I can, in my responsibility, ask for help and ask for consideration.
Right.
When I don't have to always do it on my own either. And I think that's the tribe concept is, today I'm actually leaning on my tribe.
Right.
And I think that interconnection and having the interdependence, moving and shifting graciously away from self and it's all about me concept, which we've been really living And I think it's coming back into sharing our resources with each other.
Well, I mean, that's why these conversations are so great. I mean, I think historically there have been a lot of, there's always fear in the space because, you know, especially now that we're, and also the desire to learn. Like it just, I always walk away from these conversations going, huh, okay, well, okay, that gives me a really interesting perspective, and it helps me refine and expand my point of view because, you know, I'm stuck in my own version of the world, and you know, it works for some things, but doesn't work for everything. and
Yeah.
and I love pushing these conversations because I want to just keep pushing this dialogue. I want to keep the conversation going so that as many people that are ready to take advantage of the knowledge that we and people like us have to share, that we know that, well, this is what our work is about. You know, the work isn't about the dollar value. The work is about, we know that if you just take a few simple steps, just how much more graceful you can live your life and how much better that would be. And in a world gone mad, it just, yeah, we're trying not to sink the lifeboat. Right. And
Right.
and I just and I think, you know, when you have your own personal struggles, you know, it's just when you know what it feels like to be unwell, when you know what it feels like to be uncertain, when you know what it feels like to be separate, um, and it and finding a way through that to a place that's a little bit more stable and certainly a lot more graceful, and being able to say, listen, you don't have to spend, you know, $60,000 in 20 years to figure it out, right? Just, just take some really good advice if you're willing to take it, and follow the practice and ask for help and follow the practice. And you'll find that one, it's not going to cost you $60,000, and two, it may not take you 20 years. In fact, what you could
Yeah.
do in a period of 90 days could be extraordinary for your health. Your body is so forgiving, regardless of how badly you treated it. The body is so forgiving, and it just wants to be healthy. And as soon as you create that space for it, the body will just jump into action.
That always wows me. It still wows me. Yeah, when you see transformation in clients and programs, you know, within those three months, you know, it's just amazing how, you know, just on that cellular level, we can repair the whole structure of the liver or the whole structure of, you know, I just think it's just I still think it's wow, you know, the epigenetics and the genetics factor and the genetics world. It's just incredibly amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's well, I think, I think there's, more conversation like this. We should try to arrange on a monthly basis, maybe to pop into some of these topics, and maybe we'll get
Great.
a little more nerdy next time. We'll
Sounds great, David.
strip it down a little bit more, but I think
That's
for me,
right.
some of the important takeaways for people from this conversation is that it's just, it really explore breath work as an extraordinary tool. Really, you know, uh, really kind of take stock of where you think your stress level is. If you couldn't exercise for a month, but nothing would change, you wouldn't get fat, you wouldn't lose any muscle mass. Does the idea of that provoke anxiety? Then you get a pretty good look into exactly where your stress level is. It's pretty high, and really do seek out some help. Right? It's not just whatever help that you're more comfortable first approaching. So it doesn't have to be me, it doesn't have to be Rosa. It doesn't mean have to be anybody in particular, but whatever avenue that speaks to you, you feel, okay, that I'm comfortable with walking down that path right now. That'd be my first step in. But do take the opportunity. It's just the body is certainly forgiving, and it can be very graceful, but it won't do it forever. And and it's just and we see again what kind of provokes these conversations is just the amount of fear that's out there, and the amount of fear around vulnerability and the fear of viral spread. And I was joking to somebody, I said, I'm going around licking doorknobs. Like, I'm just trying to jack my white blood cell count to the ceiling, but I'm proactive. And yes, it's my career and that's the way I think. But if I'm living in fear and I feel vulnerable, then that's telling me I should take action. Not, I shouldn't run away and hide, but I should be proactive saying, if I'm feeling vulnerable, then what can I do not to be here in 3 months from now or 6 months from now? What actions can I take? And I think that's really important. If you're feeling a little bit afraid and that the message does resonate with you, to reach out and say, what are the simple things I can do? Not the, what is the $10,000 package? What are the simple things that I can do that are relatively inexpensive, that I can start getting out of this feeling of fear and vulnerability because of what's happening in the world? Because, if something like this happens, well, it's not the first time it's happened, and it won't be the last. So how can I ensure that I don't live my life in fear if that's what I'm currently feeling now? So, take the opportunity to reach out to Rosa or myself if you're so inclined, or anybody in your particular community that speaks this kind of language and that you feel comfortable with approaching.
Thank you so much, David, for reconnecting and having this incredible time together. I do walk away going, wow, some of those dive deep components, and it's wonderful. It's really wonderful. So thank you so much for organising the time shared today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, like I said, let's maybe we'll make sure that it's something that we can do more on a we'll do it maybe on a monthly basis. If that works out, we'll pick some topics. Because I think there's a lot. Endometriosis, actually, I'd really like to dive deep into that. There's some really interesting conversations around toxicity, dioxins, just some really interesting stuff I was reading. I got drawn into the conversation. Obviously, it doesn't affect me, but it certainly affects a lot of women. But I'm fascinated by simple things that can be done to improve, even just improvement of health status of women, improves the symptomology of how women contend with endometriosis. So
I agree.
Awesome. Okay. Well, until next time, my friend. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.